The sun was shining over the calm waters of Maple Lake, a hidden place that looked almost untouched by time. Birds sang in the tall trees, and the water reflected the blue sky like a giant mirror. It was peaceful, far away from the noise of the city. In the middle of this calm stood a small wooden cabin. The cabin looked old but strong, with smoke slowly rising from its chimney. This cabin belonged to a man named David. He had bought it years ago, but only a few people knew the truth about his connection to the land. To outsiders, it looked like an ordinary cabin near the edge of the lake. To David, it was much more. David was a quiet man who enjoyed simple things. He liked to sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watch the water and hear the wind through the pine trees. For him, the cabin was a place of peace, but peace never lasts long when people like Karen get involved. Karen was new to Maple Lake. She was the kind of person who liked to be in charge of everything. As soon as she moved into the nearby housing area, she joined the Homeowners Association and soon became its loudest voice. She believed she had the right to control who came and went around the lake. If something was not done the way she wanted, she would raise her voice until people listened. One bright Saturday morning, Karen walked with her little dog toward the cabin. She looked around as if she owned the place. She had already complained about the color of fences, the size of mailboxes, and even the sound of children playing. But today, she had found something new to complain about. She stopped in front of David's cabin and frowned. "This old cabin is not part of our community rules," she muttered to herself. "It looks too old and it spoils the view of the lake. Someone needs to do something about it." David, who was sitting in a chair on the porch, looked up when he heard her footsteps. "Good morning," he said kindly. Karen ignored the greeting. "Excuse me," she said sharply, "you cannot stay here. This cabin is not approved by the HOA. You will have to leave immediately." David raised his eyebrows. "Leave? This is my cabin. I have every right to be here." Karen crossed her arms. "Not anymore. I am on the HOA board, and we do not allow old, unsafe cabins near the lake. It lowers the value of our homes. You need to pack your things and go." David gave a small smile. He had dealt with people like her before. Calmly, he replied, "This cabin has been here long before your houses were even built. I am not going anywhere." Karen's face turned red. She was not used to people saying no to her. "If you refuse to leave," she snapped, "I will call the police. You are trespassing on HOA property." David leaned back in his chair. "Trespassing? That is an interesting word. But before you make that call, maybe you should be certain about whose land this is." Karen didn't listen. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "Hello, yes, this is Karen from Maple Lake Community. There is a man refusing to leave a cabin by the lake. He is trespassing on HOA property. Please send someone right away." David stayed quiet. He watched the water sparkle in the sunlight while Karen spoke loudly, making sure her voice carried as if she wanted the whole world to hear. Within 20 minutes, a police car drove down the gravel road. 2 officers stepped out, adjusting their hats as they approached the cabin. Karen rushed to meet them. "Officers, thank goodness you came," she said in a dramatic voice. "This man refuses to leave. He is living here without permission, and the HOA does not allow it. You need to remove him immediately." The officers turned to David. He stood calmly, his hands in his pockets. One officer asked, "Sir, do you live here?" "Do you own this property?" David nodded. "Yes, officer. I own this cabin. And more than that, I own the land it stands on." Karen let out a laugh. "That is not true. The HOA controls this area. He is lying to you. Show him out." But David's calm voice did not shake. "I suggest you check the county records before making any decisions." The officers exchanged a look. One of them stepped aside and made a quick call to the county office. Karen stood impatiently, tapping her foot, convinced that David would soon be forced out. After a few minutes, the officer returned. He looked at David with a respectful nod. "Sir, according to the county records, you are the registered owner of this entire land. Not only this cabin, but the whole lake area belongs to you." Karen's mouth fell open. "What? That cannot be true. The HOA runs this neighborhood." The officer shook his head. "Ma'am, the HOA has no authority here. This land is private and it all belongs to him." David simply smiled and looked at the lake. He had been waiting for this truth to come out. Karen, however, had only just learned the first part of a much bigger story. The silence after the officer's words was heavy. Karen stood frozen, her mouth half open, her dog tugging at the leash as if even the little animal wanted to escape the awkward moment. The lake breeze carried the sound of rustling leaves, but no one spoke. Finally, Karen broke the silence. "This must be some mistake," she said quickly, her voice trembling between anger and disbelief. "The HOA controls this area, I know it. Our rules are written down. He cannot just own everything." The officer looked at her patiently. "Ma'am, I checked twice. The county records are clear. This property, including the lake and the forest land around it, is registered in David's name. Your HOA has no legal right here." Karen's face turned red. But that means all our meetings, all our votes, all our rules mean nothing." David finally stood, stretching his arms as if he had all the time in the world. "It means," he said calmly, "that you have been holding authority where you had none. This land was passed down to me years ago. Every tree, every stone, and every wave in this lake is under my care." The officers gave him a respectful nod. "Sorry to bother you, sir. It seems this was a misunderstanding. We'll be on our way." With that, they left, leaving Karen alone with David. Karen's eyes narrowed. "You could have told me earlier," she said sharply. "Instead, you embarrassed me in front of the officers." David looked at her kindly. "I did not embarrass you. You did that yourself by trying to control what was never yours." For a moment, Karen had no words. She turned on her heel and marched away, her little dog struggling to keep up. But inside, her mind was racing. She had never been challenged like this before. She was used to being feared, obeyed, or at least tolerated. Now someone had stood in her way, and worse, that someone had more power than she ever imagined. That evening, as the sun set over Maple Lake, David sat on his porch again. He sipped his tea slowly, watching the golden light fade into pink. He thought about Karen's anger, and knew she would not give up so easily. People like her always came back. David had lived quietly for many years, never boasting about what he owned. Few knew that his grandfather had once been the largest landowner in the county. When his grandfather passed away, the land went to David. But David was not a man who cared about showing off. He kept to himself, using the land only when he wanted peace. The rest of the time he lived simply, blending into the town like any ordinary person. But now, with Karen stirring trouble, David realized the truth would not stay hidden much longer. If the people in the housing area found out that he owned not just the cabin but the entire county, they would be shocked. And with that shock would come more conflict. Meanwhile, Karen was pacing back and forth in her living room. She had told her husband, her neighbors, and even her friends on the phone about what had happened. But the more she spoke, the more ridiculous her story sounded. "He owns the whole lake," she kept repeating. "And they say he owns the land around it too. How is that even possible?" Her husband shrugged. "Maybe it is possible. Some families pass down land for generations." Karen slammed her hand on the table. "I will not accept it. If he thinks he can sit there and act like a king, he is mistaken. I will find a way to prove he does not deserve it." The next morning, she returned to the lake. She stood at the edge, staring at the cabin as if planning her next move. David saw her from the porch. Instead of being annoyed, he almost smiled. He admired her determination, though he knew it came from pride more than justice. "Back so soon?" he called out. Karen lifted her chin. "I want to see proof with my own eyes. Show me your documents. Show me the papers that say you own this land. Until then, I will not believe it." David considered her words. He could have refused, but something in her tone made him think it was better to settle this once and for all. "Fine," he said. "Come inside and I will show you." Karen hesitated. She did not like the idea of stepping into the cabin of a man she considered her rival. But curiosity pushed her forward. She followed David into the wooden cabin where the smell of pine and old books filled the air. Inside, David opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. He placed it on the table and flipped it open. "Here are the deeds," he explained. "Signed, sealed, and recorded. My family has owned this land since before most of these houses were even built." Karen leaned over the papers, her eyes scanning every line. She saw the county seal, the signatures, the dates. It was all real. Her knees felt weak. She sat down in the chair, her dog curling at her feet. "So it's true," she whispered. David nodded. "Yes, it's true. But the question is, what will you do with this knowledge?" Karen looked up, her face a mix of anger, fear, and something else, maybe respect. For the first time, she realized she was facing someone who could not be pushed around. Outside, the lake rippled gently, as if it too was waiting for her answer. Karen left the cabin with her head spinning. She had seen the papers with her own eyes. The land really did belong to David, But instead of giving up, her pride grew stronger. She could not stand the idea of someone else holding so much power, especially someone so calm and quiet. In her mind, David was not using his position the way she thought he should. Walking home, Karen pulled out her phone and sent a series of messages to the HOA group. By the time she reached her door, 5 neighbors had already agreed to meet at her house that evening. If David thought one set of papers could silence her, he was wrong. At the same time, David sat back in his chair inside the cabin. He placed the folder back into the drawer, locked it, and poured himself another cup of tea. He had no anger toward Karen. Instead, he felt a strange mixture of patience and curiosity. He knew people like her always tried to fight back, but he also knew truth was a stronger shield than pride. That night, Karen's living room was full of voices. Neighbors crowded around, sipping coffee and whispering with serious faces. Karen stood at the front like a leader giving orders. "We cannot let him control everything," she declared. "Yes, the papers say he owns the land, but that does not mean he should have the right to tell us what to do. We pay taxes, we built our homes here, and we deserve a say in how things are run." One neighbor, Mark, raised his hand. "But if the law says it is his, what can we do?" "The police already confirmed it." Karen's eyes flashed. "The law is one thing. Influence is another. If we stand together, we can push him to share control. We can make it so that he has no choice but to listen to us." Another neighbor, Anna, spoke softly. "But Karen, what if he does not care about our demands? What if he just ignores us?" Karen slammed her hand on the table. "Then we make life difficult for him until he listens. Trust me, I know how to handle people like him." The neighbors exchanged nervous looks, but many nodded. Karen's confidence often pulled people in, even when her ideas were risky. By the end of the meeting, she had formed a small group determined to challenge David's quiet rule. The next morning, David noticed unusual activity. Cars were parked along the gravel road and several neighbors stood near the lake, pointing at his cabin. He watched them for a while, then returned to his tea. He knew this was Karen's work. Later, Karen herself marched up to the cabin again, this time with 3 neighbors at her side. She knocked loudly on the wooden door. David opened it slowly. "Good morning," he said, his calm voice the same as always. Karen straightened her shoulders. "We came here as a group to discuss new terms. You may own the land, but you cannot run everything alone. We want to form a committee that decides how the lake area should be used." David stepped aside and gestured toward the porch. "Please sit." The group sat stiffly in the wooden chairs. David remained standing, his hands resting on the railing. "I understand your concerns," he said, "but you are forgetting something important. I never once tried to control your homes, your gardens, or your fences. You brought the fight to me, not the other way around." Karen leaned forward. "That may be true, but ownership brings responsibility. You cannot just sit here in your cabin and claim everything is yours. We live here too. We deserve authority." David smiled gently. "Authority is not always the same as ownership. You chose to build your homes here without asking who owned the land around them. I never stopped you. I let you live in peace, and I still want peace." The neighbors exchanged glances. Karen frowned, realizing his words made sense. But her pride pushed her to continue. "If you refuse to share power, then we will hold community meetings without you. We will act as if your papers mean nothing." David's eyes narrowed just slightly. For the first time, there was a sharpness in his calm tone. "You can hold as many meetings as you like, but remember this. The law is clear. The land is mine. If you try to build, expand, or change anything without permission, it will not end well for your plans." The neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Mark spoke up. "Maybe we should try to work with him instead of against him." Karen shot him a glare, but David nodded. "That is the wiser path. I am not your enemy. The lake is big enough for everyone. But if you try to fight me, you will only waste your energy." The group sat in silence. Finally, Karen stood. "This is not over," she said coldly. "You may think you hold all the power, but people are stronger together." She stormed off with her neighbors trailing behind, their faces unsure. David watched them go, then turned back toward the lake. He knew the battle was just beginning, but he also knew something Karen did not. His connection to the land was deeper than papers and deeds. It was rooted in history, in promises, and in secrets not yet revealed. As the evening fell and the sky turned golden, David whispered to himself, "She does not understand yet, but she will. The water rippled, reflecting the fading light as if the lake itself was listening to the unfolding story. The next few days at Maple Lake were tense. Karen's words spread quickly through the community. Some neighbors supported her, others doubted her. But all were curious about the quiet man in the cabin who supposedly owned the entire county. Gossip filled the air like buzzing bees, and David's name was on everyone's lips. Karen, restless as ever, refused to let the matter go. She visited the town library, searched through old maps, and even questioned elderly locals about the land's history. She wanted to find something, anything that could weaken David's claim. But the more she searched, the more she discovered just how deep his family's roots went. David's grandfather had been one of the first settlers in the area. He had worked hard, bought land piece by piece, and over time had become the largest landowner. When others left, his family stayed, and the deeds remained in their name. For generations, the land passed quietly from father to son until it reached David. One afternoon, as Karen was leaving the library with a stack of papers, she ran into Mrs. Green, one of the oldest residents of the county. Mrs. Green leaned on her cane, her eyes sharp despite her age. "Researching David's land, are you?" she asked. Karen flushed. "I just want to understand how one man can claim so much. It doesn't seem fair." Mrs. Green gave a small laugh. "Fair? Child, fairness has little to do with history. His grandfather saved this place during hard times. When families were selling their land to survive, he bought it to keep it safe. That's why David has it now. It's not greed, it's legacy." Karen frowned. "Legacy or not, it gives him too much power. No one should own an entire county." Mrs. Green tapped her cane. "Maybe, but I've known David since he was a boy. He doesn't misuse what he owns. He respects the land. That's more than I can say for most people." Karen walked away with a storm inside her. Every new piece of information made David look stronger, while she felt smaller. Still, she couldn't stop herself. Pride drove her forward like a fire that refused to die. Meanwhile, David noticed the growing tension. Neighbors began avoiding him, whispering as he passed by. Some treated him with sudden respect, while others looked at him with suspicion. David sighed. He had never wanted attention. For years, he had lived quietly, letting the world think he was just another man with a cabin. Now the truth was out, and the peace he loved was slipping away. One evening, as the sun dipped low, a knock echoed on his cabin door. David opened it to find a young boy, no more than 12, standing nervously with a notebook in his hand. "Are you really the owner of the whole county?" the boy asked, his eyes wide. David smiled gently. "That's what the papers say." "Why do you ask?" The boy held up his notebook. "I'm writing a report for school about important people in our town. Everyone talks about you now. Could I ask you some questions?" David chuckled softly and invited the boy inside. He answered questions about his grandfather, about the lake, and about how he felt owning so much land. The boy listened carefully, scribbling notes. Before leaving, he said, "You don't seem scary like people say. You're just normal." David watched him run down the path and thought, if only the adults could see as clearly as children do. That same night, Karen gathered her closest supporters again. This time her plan was bolder. "We cannot change the past," she admitted, "but we can shape the future. If David truly owns everything, then he must have responsibilities. What if we demand he opens part of the land for public use? Parks, trails, events, things for the community. If he refuses, we make him look selfish in front of everyone." Some nodded eagerly, while others hesitated. Mark, who had grown more thoughtful, raised his voice. "But what if he agrees? Wouldn't that mean he is actually helping us?" Karen ignored his question. Her mind was set. She wanted to force David into a corner, to either share control or appear uncaring. In her heart, it was less about the land and more about winning. The next morning, Karen led a small crowd to David's cabin. They carried signs that read "Fairness for all and share the land." It wasn't a large protest, but it was loud enough to disturb the peaceful air of the lake. David stepped onto the porch, watching calmly as Karen shouted her demands. "You claim to own this place, but you do nothing for the people who live here. If you are the true owner, then act like it. Give something back to the community. Prove you are not just sitting on power like a throne." The crowd clapped, some chanting in agreement. David remained quiet for a long moment, then spoke in his steady voice. "I never wanted to rule anyone," he said. "This land was passed to me and I have cared for it. But if what you want is access to nature, then you shall have it. Tomorrow I will show you something none of you have seen before." The crowd fell silent, curious. Karen frowned, unsure whether she had just won or lost. David turned back into the cabin, leaving them whispering to one another. The next day promised to reveal secrets of the land that had been hidden for generations. The morning sun rose over Maple Lake, casting a golden light on the water. Birds circled above, and a soft mist rolled across the surface. It was a morning that felt different, filled with quiet expectation. Word had spread quickly that David planned to reveal something to the community. Families gathered near the cabin, curious and restless, whispering about what secrets the land might hold. Karen stood near the front of the crowd, her arms folded tightly. She told herself this was another trick, a way for David to look generous while keeping control. Yet a small part of her was curious. What could he possibly show that would change anything? At last David stepped onto the porch. He looked calm as always, but there was a firmness in his voice when he spoke. "You asked for me to give something back," he said. "But what many of you do not know is that this land already holds gifts waiting to be shared. Follow me and I will show you." With that, he walked down the steps carrying a walking stick. The crowd followed, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path. Karen kept close behind, determined to see what game he was playing. David led them along the lake, past tall pines and clusters of wildflowers. Soon he turned onto a narrow trail almost hidden by overgrown bushes. Most people had never noticed it before. He moved branches aside, guiding the crowd deeper into the forest. The trail wound uphill, shaded by ancient trees whose roots twisted across the ground. Birds sang above, and the air smelled fresh and earthy. After nearly half an hour of walking, they reached a clearing. The crowd gasped. Before them lay a meadow filled with wildflowers of every color: purple, yellow, white, and blue. Butterflies danced in the air, and a small stream trickled through the grass, sparkling in the sunlight. At the far edge stood a wooden archway carved with symbols no one recognized. "This place," David said, "was hidden by my grandfather. He wanted it kept safe until the right time. Now I believe the time has come. This meadow, this stream, and the trail leading here are yours to enjoy. I will open it as a public nature path, free for everyone who lives in the community." The crowd broke into murmurs of surprise and excitement. Children ran into the meadow, laughing as they chased butterflies. Parents smiled, taking photos and admiring the flowers. For a moment, even Karen was silent. Mark stepped forward, his voice filled with respect. "David, this is beautiful. Why didn't you show it before?" David looked toward the mountains in the distance. "Because not everyone values what is given. Some seek to control rather than appreciate. I waited for a time when people could truly see it as a gift, not a prize to fight over." Karen crossed her arms. "So you think this one meadow is enough to make us accept your authority? It's nice, but it doesn't change the fact that you hold too much power." David turned to her, his voice calm but steady. "Karen, this was never about power. It is about stewardship. My grandfather taught me that when you own something precious, you are not its master, but its guardian. That is how I see this land. Not as mine alone, but as something entrusted to me." The words struck something in the crowd. Many nodded, their expressions softening. They could see the sincerity in his face, and the meadow before them was proof of his intentions. But Karen could not let go so easily. She walked to the wooden archway, running her hand over the carvings. "And what is this? Some decoration to make yourself look important?" David shook his head. "Those carvings are older than me, older than my grandfather. This land has history, deeper than any of us. My family promised to protect it, and I will honor that promise." The sun broke through the clouds, lighting the meadow in a golden glow. The crowd fell into silence, moved by the beauty and the weight of David's words. For the first time, doubt flickered in Karen's eyes. Still, she straightened her shoulders and said, "You may win their hearts with flowers and streams, but you have not won mine. I will keep searching. There must be a way to balance the scales." David only nodded. "You are free to search, Karen. But remember, not every battle needs to be fought. Sometimes peace is the stronger path." The crowd slowly began to head back down the trail, chatting excitedly about the meadow. Children carried handfuls of wildflowers. Neighbors smiled at one another, and a new sense of unity spread through them. Karen, however, lingered behind, staring at the carvings on the archway. Something about them stirred her curiosity. They seemed like symbols of a story not yet told. She whispered to herself, If there is more to this land, I will find it. David, watching from a distance, saw her determination but did not stop her. He knew Karen's pride would not rest until she uncovered every secret. What she did not realize was that the land held more mysteries than she could ever imagine. As the evening came, David returned to his cabin, the image of the meadow glowing in his mind. He felt a quiet relief, knowing he had given something to the community that could bring joy. But he also sensed that Karen's fight was far from over. The real test was still ahead. The meadow and hidden trail became the talk of Maple Lake. Every evening, families walked the path, children played by the stream, and neighbors brought picnic baskets to sit under the archway. The once quiet forest now echoed with laughter and chatter. Many people praised David for his gift, and slowly, respect for him grew stronger. But Karen was not satisfied. To her, the meadow felt like a trick, a distraction meant to make David look noble. She wanted something that could weaken his control, something that would shift the balance in her favor. One afternoon, she returned to the meadow alone. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze and sunlight glowed through the archway. Karen walked closer, staring again at the strange carvings. The symbols looked like circles, lines, and shapes she could not understand. She traced them with her finger and whispered, "What are you hiding, David?" Nearby, Mrs. Green was gathering herbs. She noticed Karen and slowly walked over. "You're still here, child? The others left hours ago." Karen turned quickly. "Mrs. Green, do you know what these symbols mean?" The old woman leaned on her cane, studying the archway. Her eyes softened. "Ah, yes. Those carvings were made long before your time and mine. Some say they belong to the first people who lived here. Others say David's grandfather added to them to mark a promise." "A promise?" Karen asked sharply. "What kind of promise?" Mrs. Green smiled faintly. "A promise to protect. This land carries stories older than us. If you look hard enough, you might find more than flowers and streams." With that, she walked away, leaving Karen deep in thought. Karen spent the next week searching. She followed the stream farther than the children ever dared to go. She studied the forest, climbed small hills, and looked for anything unusual. Finally, one evening she found something. Hidden under thick vines near a rocky slope was a wooden door built into the hillside. It looked old, almost forgotten, but strong enough to have survived decades. Karen's heart raced. She pulled at the vines until the door was clear, then pushed it open with all her strength. It creaked loudly, revealing a dark tunnel inside. Karen hesitated. Part of her wanted to run back and tell the others, but her pride pushed her forward. She lit the flashlight on her phone and stepped into the tunnel. The air inside was cool and damp. The walls were lined with stone and the ground was smooth, as if people had walked here long ago. Karen walked slowly, her heart beating fast, until she reached a large chamber. There she saw shelves filled with old boxes, papers, and tools. In the center stood a wooden chest, carved with the same strange symbols as the archway. Karen gasped. She hurried to the chest and tried to open it, but it was locked. Still, she opened some of the boxes on the shelves. Inside were maps of the county, old photographs, and letters yellowed with age. One letter caught her eye. It was written in neat handwriting, "To my son, and to his son after him. This land must remain whole. It is not only soil and trees, but history. Protect it from those who would divide it. Share its beauty, but guard its heart." Karen's hands trembled. She realized she had stumbled upon something important, something David had never shown anyone. This hidden place proved his family had guarded secrets for generations. She quickly snapped photos with her phone, capturing the maps, letters, and the chest. "Now I have proof," she whispered. "Proof that he has been keeping things from us." The next morning, Karen marched to David's cabin, her face fierce with determination. Neighbors followed behind, curious about her urgency. She stopped at his porch and called out, "David, I know about the tunnel. I know about the chamber and the chest. Why did you hide it from everyone?" The crowd gasped. Whispers filled the air. David stepped outside slowly, his expression calm but serious. "So you found it," he said softly. Karen lifted her chin. "Yes, I did. And now everyone knows you have been keeping secrets. You act like a guardian, but what are you really hiding in that chest?" The neighbors looked at David, waiting for an answer. Children clutched their parents' hands. Even the air seemed heavy with tension. David sighed, his eyes on the crowd. "I was not hiding it out of greed. The chamber is part of our family's history. The chest is locked for a reason, because it holds items that must be revealed carefully at the right time. Karen pointed at him. That is not good enough. If you truly care about this land, then show us what is inside. Prove that you are not keeping power to yourself. The crowd murmured in agreement. For the first time, David saw doubt in their faces. He understood that Karen's discovery had placed him in a difficult position. He raised his hand for silence. Very well, he said firmly. If you wish to see the truth, then come with me tomorrow. I will open the chest and you will all understand why it was kept hidden. The crowd stirred with excitement and unease. Karen's eyes gleamed with triumph, believing she had finally forced David's hand. But David's calm expression did not break. Deep inside, he knew that once the chest was opened, nothing would ever be the same again. The morning air was cool and fresh as the townspeople gathered near David's cabin. Word had spread quickly that he would open the mysterious chest hidden in the underground chamber. Families came early, whispering in curiosity, while children tugged on their parents' sleeves, eager to see the secret revealed. Karen stood at the front of the crowd, her arms crossed with pride. For the first time, she felt the eyes of the people on her side. She whispered to herself, "Today David will lose his power. Today everyone will see who he really is." David stepped out of the cabin, calm and steady. He looked at the crowd and spoke with a firm but gentle voice. "You have all trusted me for many years, though some have doubted my choices. Today, I will open the chest my family has guarded for generations. But before I do, I ask that you remember this. What you see is not mine alone. It belongs to all of us." He led the group down the hidden trail toward the tunnel Karen had discovered. The wooden door creaked as it opened, and one by one the people entered, carrying lanterns and flashlights to light their way. The chamber felt larger with so many inside, the shelves and papers now visible to all. In the center stood the chest, waiting silently, its carvings glowing faintly under the lantern light. Karen pushed forward. "Open it," she demanded. David nodded. He pulled a small key from a chain around his neck and knelt before the chest. The crowd grew silent. With a click, the lock opened. Slowly, he lifted the lid. Inside lay bundles of old documents, rolled maps tied with string, and several leather-bound books. At the very bottom was a box wrapped in cloth. David carefully lifted the items out one by one, placing them on a nearby table. He opened the first book, showing handwritten notes and drawings. "These," he explained, "are records from my great-grandfather. He was one of the first to settle near this lake. He believed the land was not just for living, but for teaching and sharing. These books contain his lessons, his plans, and his dreams for this county." He unrolled a map, spreading it across the table. It showed the entire county, marked with trails, rivers, and hidden spots. This map was made long ago. Every stream, every tree, every path was carefully recorded. My family has used it to protect these lands, to keep them whole so they would never be divided or destroyed. The crowd leaned closer, fascinated. Karen frowned, not satisfied. "Books and maps are not secrets," she said loudly. "What about that box at the bottom? What are you hiding there?" David lifted the small cloth-wrapped box and slowly removed the cover. Inside lay a collection of symbols carved into stone tablets. Each stone had markings similar to those on the archway. Gasps filled the chamber as people stared at them. "These stones," David said, "are older than my family. They belong to the people who lived here long before us. They tell of seasons, harvests, and traditions. My grandfather swore to keep them safe so that their meaning would never be lost. They are not treasures of gold or silver, but treasures of memory, culture, and respect." Karen's face flushed. She had expected jewels, money, or power, something she could use against David. But instead, she saw history, carefully guarded for generations. One of the children tugged at his mother's sleeve. "So David was protecting stories?" the child asked. David smiled warmly. "Yes. Stories, lessons, and reminders that this land belongs to all of us, not just one person. That is why I never use these for myself. They are meant to be shared, but carefully, so they are not forgotten or misused." The crowd began to murmur with approval. People admired the stones, maps, and writings. Some praised David for his patience, others thanked him for his honesty. Slowly, the weight of suspicion lifted from the room. Karen, however, felt cornered. Her plan had backfired. Instead of exposing David as selfish, she had pushed him into showing his true heart, and now the people respected him even more. She clenched her fists, but deep down she knew she had lost. Mrs. Green stepped forward, her cane tapping against the stone floor. She spoke in her calm, wise voice. David has carried a heavy duty, but no guardian should walk alone. If these treasures belong to us all, then we must help him protect them. Together, we can honor the past and care for the future. The crowd nodded in agreement. Men offered to build a safer place for the records. Women suggested a small museum by the meadow, and children promised to learn the stories so they could pass them on. David's eyes softened with gratitude. "I am thankful," he said. "This is what my grandfather would have wanted, not secrecy, but unity. If we guard this together, the meadow, the lake, and the county will remain whole for generations." For the first time, even Karen remained silent. She looked at the chest, then at the smiling faces around her. Though she could not admit it, she felt a small shift in her heart. She realized that the land was more than a prize to win. It was a gift to share. As the people left the chamber and walked back through the meadow, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the flowers in golden light. Laughter returned to the air, and children ran ahead along the stream. David stood by the archway, watching with quiet pride. He no longer felt like a lone guardian. The weight of responsibility was lighter now, shared by many hands and hearts. The story of the chest had changed everything. What began as suspicion and conflict ended as a bond of trust and unity, and so, the county that David's family once protected alone would now be guarded by all who loved it. The meadow, the lake, and the chest of truth would forever remind them that true power was not in ownership, but in shared respect.